Jordan Peterson talked about Bitcoin in his recent podcast and shared his thoughts on why it could be a game changer. He, along with his book club members, combined their passions for psychology and Bitcoin to explore the future of money. Let's have a look at Jordan Peterson's Bitcoin podcast, a masterclass in what not to do. Have you heard about Jordan Peterson's recent podcast on Bitcoin? We have gone through it and what we think that it could have been really great, but instead, we got a conversation between Peterson and a group of fanboys. And that conversation was more a wordy chit-chat than some serious crypto experts talk. As an admirer of Peterson, we felt disappointed to some extent or perhaps completely. Dr. Peterson introduces the crew of Bitcoin enthusiasts, Gigi, John Velas, Robert Breedlove, and Richard James, as members of a book club that has combined their love for Dr. Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning and the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Well, that's a 90-minute podcast with a lot of discussions and opinions, however, all seem more like. So, let's first have a look at some opinions of the podcast members. Let's talk about what went wrong with this podcast on Bitcoin. You see, there was a group of people who called themselves Bitcoin maximalists, sounding like experts in cryptocurrency and finance. But it looks like they mixed philosophy, finance, and crypto in a hodgepodge. Things are not making up much valuable sense. In this podcast, John Velas and Robert Breedlove took it one step further by claiming that Bitcoin can drastically change your psychology. Can you believe it? Bitcoin isn't just a financial tool, it's a magical substance that can transform you. That's hard to swallow. The leader of the book club, Mr. Velas, even tried to do a psychological analysis of Bitcoin to get Jordan Peterson's attention. But let's be real, they all are talking while adding a lot of wordy sentences, which mostly serve as decorative sentences. More words, less information. Let's have a look at the start of the podcast. It all started just 5 minutes when John Velas said something pretty strange. He claimed that Bitcoin can transform people and make them better by changing their relationships with time. How bizarre is that? We took it as really strange. When Jordan Peterson asked for proof, Velas just rumbled on without really saying anything. He used a lot of big words, but it didn't make any sense. It's clear that he's not an expert and is just using words to look more into the topic. Also, have a look at his opinion. He said, one of the interesting overlaps between your work and you and the changes that are represented in people that get involved in Bitcoin is I think that there's a lot of instantiation of a lot of things you talk about are represented in the changes we're seeing in the people that engage with Bitcoin. He uses a lot of fancy words to sound impressive, but he is not saying anything at all. We think this could have been said on a bit clearer note. He is discussing the idea that having a set of keys to a Bitcoin wallet represents a new type of inherent property right. He is arguing that this claim is completely absurd because inherent property rights have been a defining feature of common law in almost all Western societies since the mid-1600s. He further explains that if you own something, such as gold or land, you have inherent property rights over that item. The idea that Bitcoin represents some metaphysical expression of pure ownership is false, as the key to a Bitcoin wallet only allow you to access your Bitcoin. They function similarly to a title deed that declares you the owner of a piece of land. In other words, owning Bitcoin is not fundamentally different from owning any other type of property. Let's talk about Robert Breedlove and his views on a fiat currency. Well, we appreciate his career status. He is an accomplished financier who has experience in the financial industry. However, he makes some very strange and outlandish claims about economics and the nature of money that we need to examine more closely. Breedlove believes that fiat currency is responsible for our society's lack of trust, our lack of social morality, and our short-term thinking. Really? where's the role of basic morality? While we agree that there are significant problems with the current financial system, it's not entirely fair to blame fiat currency alone. Breedlove's argument that fiat currency is fundamentally corrupt is simply not based on reality. His belief that all of our societal issues arise from the moral cancer of inflation is dangerously myopic. He thinks that inflation caused by central banks is really bad for society and that printing money is like stealing money from people. However, he doesn't realize that banks also give out loans called credit. When banks increase the money supply and lower interest rates, people can borrow money and start business or buy things that they couldn't afford before. This helps the economy grow and make things cheaper for everyone. It's not fair to say that fiat currency is the only problem with the economy. There are a lot of things that affect it. Having more money can make people more productive and competitive in the market, which can make things cheaper. So inflation isn't really being stolen from people. He believes that since a central organization controls the supply of fiat money, it means that the entire global market is also regulated. This is not true. The global market is made up of independent actors who make decisions about prices. The fact that they use fiat currency to settle transactions does not mean that the pricing method is centralized or regulated without them knowing. However, he couldn't provide any real-life examples of how this regulation happens or how fiat currency is used to control prices. This leaves us confused about what he means and how it applies in the real world. That's a lot of talk by him. But let's talk about other members also. Dr. Peterson asked if Bitcoin is easy to spend, and Gigi argued that many people are already using it for day-to-day transactions. However, there is no evidence to support Gigi's claim, and it is unclear how Bitcoin will be adopted on a larger scale. For Bitcoin to be a functional global currency, it would need to be a stable price and efficiently track goods and services. If a large number of people buy goods and services using Bitcoin, they must also have an income that is fixed in Bitcoin. For an employer to pay a salary in Bitcoin, that employer must be receiving revenue that is also fixed in Bitcoin. Furthermore, to create and manufacture goods that are sold for revenue, the companies producing those goods must also have their overhead fixed in Bitcoin. However, the current Bitcoin network is too slow to handle the volume of daily transactions required for global adoptions. The Lightning Network, a proposed solution, is not settled on the Bitcoin network and undermines the security of Bitcoin. Yes, it is complicated, but their opinions are making it more complicated. In this podcast, we can see that the participants were huge fans of Jordan Peterson. They had a conversation about Bitcoin and decentralized finance. But what was disappointing was that they tried to make their arguments fit into Dr. Peterson's psychological framework, even when it didn't make sense. It seemed like they were just trying to push their own ideas of Bitcoin maximalism. This was a missed opportunity to educate a new audience about the benefits of decentralized finance. Instead, these Bitcoin maximalists took over and used the platform to spread their conspiracy theories about the psychology of Bitcoin and how it relates to the global economic history. It's unfortunate because there is a lot to learn about decentralized finance and Bitcoin, but the conversation was derailed by their personal approach. So that's all for now. We think that Peterson's podcast started as a very fruitful podcast on Bitcoin, but turned out quickly as just random talks about mixed philosophies with wordy sentences. It has less meaningful talks about Bitcoin. We have expected more, perhaps.